Hey, my name is Patrick, and today we're going to talk about how the simplified diagram of workings of the carburetor, how it relates to an actual diagram of our Solex 481 carburetor. So we have a Solex 481 carburetor right here that we're just going to have it as a decoration in the corner of the frame, and we're going to talk about how it usually works. So again, your engine is at idle. Now let's talk how this simplification relates to our reality. So here we have a choke. The choke is being, maybe you have this one as well. This is our choke. So as you can see right now, it's totally open. Then that means the air is entering our carburetor, our carburetor through a very important air filter. Now that's even though the air could enter our carburetor, but cannot exactly, because our throttle plates are very much so still closed as they are right here. So because of that, there are other passages that are required for that allow the fuel air mixture to enter the engine chamber. So even though the throttle valves are open, throttle plates are closed, that means the air still enters it, and usually it's through the idle ports. So the idle port has a screw of some sort attached to it. Let me just use maybe a simplified version. So this is our carburetor. Right now the throttle are closed. Forget those are our secondary throttles, we don't concern about it. Every carburetor, if you cut off this part of the carburetor and only keep the front one, you're gonna have totally viable working carburetor. Many carburetors are simple like this. So now because of that, you have this thing. Those are our idle screw openings. Since we have two throttle valves, we have 1 and 2. Simple carburetors have only one. So if we're going to simplify this carb even more, we cut off this part and we cut off this part, and that's our low carburetor with one opening. And then you would have the throttles right here, throttle valves, and you have a idle screw right here that by moving in and out, you increases or decreases amount of fuel air mixture. Now remember, it's fuel air mixture, not just fuel. I mean, for the sometimes simplicity we call it fuel, but in essence it's a mixture of air and fuel that enters the engine, and that's what's combustible. So that will be our procedure. Now let's see how that relates. Let's follow the passages. So basically, the raw fuel through a fuel filter enters the fuel bowl. The amount of fuel in the fuel bowl is controlled via float that can either close or open the entrance opening, and then the fuel gets sucked by going up, and that's a very important quality. So that means it has to be sucked from the fuel bowl. It doesn't go out of the fuel bowl via gravity. It gets sucked because of the vacuum, the suction force of the engine. It gets sucked, and it gets sucked by idle jet that controls how much air enters into our system, our idle system, and it gets sucked down the tube past the idle screw and from under the throttle valve, throttle plates. So likewise here, this is our actual workings of the this is actual diagram from the manual. So the same, this is the fuel enters here, that's our fuel filter, enters to the fuel bowl. This is all that red stuff here. And then if you compare it here, the suction, because it's simplified, the fuel goes up through the tube, and we have exact same thing happening. The fuel enters through this jet, goes up, you see, past the level of the fuel. So it's sucked from the fuel bowl. It cannot do it by gravity. It has to be sucked. So in other words, suction force, the vacuum force, need to be present to suck the fuel out of the carburetor, and then goes past here. Where do you have right here? You have the idle air jet. So that's the amount of air that enters the system. So now fuel and air mixes somewhere here, and now it's a fuel air mixture, and then gets passed, and then some extra passages that obviously that the simplified version doesn't have, which is the shut-off valve that shuts off the fuel by kind of restricting the passage. And then you have the idle screw as here, So that controls amount of fuel air mixture at any given moment. And that's basically how your carburetor is working in the idling position. If you notice, there's some extra red stuff right here, which is this is the transition holes. Then this one, the simplified version, doesn't have the transition holes. Again, this is to explain what's the function of transition holes. As you notice, the throttle plates right here allow the fuel to be sucked from these bottom holes, but not through the top holes, because there is no vacuum. As a matter of fact, actually the small amount of air passing past the throttle valve prevents that suction fuel be sucked through that. However, when the throttle plates open slightly, then this part loses its suction force, it loses its vacuum, and then all of a sudden this part, the top opening, experiences some suction, some vacuum, and then that allows the engine to transition smoothly from this stage of the engine, which is idling engine, to an engine that's working at its higher RPM, which I guess, let's go to the second stage. Okay. So now we have two scenarios. So now we're working at a higher RPM. So let's see. And it's, again, if you were going to pause this video and compare the two, you would notice that all the drawings start making sense. So you have the again, fuel enters our float ball, and again our fuel enters our fuel ball, and then now, because the throttle plates are way or more open, there is not enough suction force to suck the fuel through the float ball via the idling passages. Likewise here, there's not enough fuel. See, all of it's empty because there's not enough suction force to suck the fuel out of there. However, something else is happening. Namely, you have venturis here that restrict the opening of this passage. And look at, likewise here, venturis right here that restrict the opening, and with that they create a suction in this area right here. And because of that, you have an extra tube. Here you have this tube, and you have this tube, which, by the way, in this drawing, the tube should be above the fuel level. That was just like a little mistake I made when I was making this drawing. And likewise here you have this tube, and now the force of the air passing through this part and sucking, creating so much suction that the fuel is getting again sucked up this tube here and into the engine. So likewise here, the fuel is being sucked past the venturi and into the engine. Now once again, notice the blue part, which is the air. The air enters it. There is the it's called air correction jet. So that means how much fuel gets into the system. Here in the simplified version, we don't have that. But then when the fuel and the air that's being sucked into the engine mixes in this tube and becomes a mixture of air and fuel, emulsion. It's called emulsion. Likewise here, it's just much harder to do it, so it's basically here, it's not just a stream of air and fuel, but rather there's a mist of fuel and air. So all of it's mixture, and enters the engine. And likewise here, all of it enters the engine. And that's how the Solex carburetor works as it compares to a simplified diagram of a carburetor. So what's the purpose of this video is for you to see that this is not some mystery device that somehow differs. All the carburetors look a bit differently, or might appear to look a bit differently on the outside, but in reality, every single carburetor operates on this principle. And your Solex 4A1 carburetor operates it as well. So all those devices hopefully starts making sense and become less of a mystery. And that's that.